major talks. There's Brittany already lined up in advance, so that's excellent. Her talk is entitled How Do Stoics Care? And Brittany is the co-creator of Stoic Care, a new, you could call it hub, an online hub for teachers, parents, mentors, healthcare providers, community volunteers, and all Stoics who care. So this is a really important aspect, as we were talking about earlier. Justice includes caring, but a lot of people, they leave that out, I think. Brittany is also the author of Tranquility Parenting, a guide to staying calm, mindful, and engaged. She is a member of our Modern Stoicism team, and along with Catherine, a co-organizer of the Practical Paths to Flourishing, the conference on Stoicism and women that somebody was just asking about in the chat. Brittany, remind me, so there's a question here, is there a recording or plans for another one? There were recordings from that, right?
There is a recording, and I don't have the address with me, but we can send that out. And yes, we are definitely excited about doing this again in 2022. We almost have a date to announce. It's not quite ready yet, but please be on the lookout. We will announce that through Modern Stoicism and on our Twitter feeds as well. So yes, that's definitely coming up.
All right, so we'll turn this over to Brittany.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you today, talking about a very important topic in Stoicism. How do Stoics care? Now, one reason this is important is because it's so misunderstood. There's that lingering kind of ugly stereotype out there that Stoics don't care about anything, including other people. And that is completely inaccurate. That's a misunderstanding of Stoicism. So we'll talk about that. And it's also important because it's at the heart of Stoicism. It's a very important part of the philosophy itself. So as we go through today, I'd like for you to keep this quote from Marcus Aurelius in mind. Love these people among whom your lot has fallen, but love them in all sincerity. Now, throughout the meditations, Marcus talks a lot about other people, right? About love, care, the common good, being patient and kind with people. And this is really hard to do. So throughout the meditations, he's constantly reminding himself to do it and thinking of techniques for doing this. Now, one reason I love this quote so much is because it is very specific. And you'll notice that he's not talking about some kind of abstract or theoretical love here, right? He says, love these people among whom your lot has fallen, the people that you happen to be with in your life. Maybe you didn't choose to be with some of these people, and maybe you wouldn't choose to be with them if you had a choice, but guess what? You are with them for whatever reason. And so it's up to us to make the best of that situation and love them in all sincerity. This is the second part of the quote that's really key. It's not about doing your duty grudgingly, right? Grumbling behind your back while you're loving them. No, love them in all sincerity. We have to get that sincere, authentic love in there. This is really, really hard to do, as everybody knows. So we're going to, in order to talk about this, we're going back to the basics. And the reason that we are here today, or at least the reason I'm here, I'm guessing it's the reason you are here, is because we all want to live a good life, right? We want to become happy. We want to live a meaningful life. And Stoicism helps us to answer this question. So I'd just like to point out right from the very beginning that Stoic ethics and Stoic care is not about sacrificing your own happiness for the sake of others. No, as we'll see, we become happy by caring for others. So we actually enhance our happiness at the same time that we care for others. Now, how do we do that? Well, we have to go back to the ancient Greek definition of happiness, eudaimonia, and it's quite different from when we say happy. A lot of us today mean kind of like a fleeting happiness, like, oh, I'm eating an ice cream cone, I'm so happy, or I just got a new car, I just got a promotion, I'm so happy. No, this kind of happiness is external, and that means it can be taken away, right? If the new car or the new job disappears, then so does our happiness, and that's not what we want, right? So if we are going to become truly happy with this kind of deep and lasting happiness, we want to have it internal, this steady happiness that results when we actually fulfill our potential as a human. So this is what eudaimonia is. It's the best mindset available to people. And it's fulfilling our capacity for humanity, basically. We don't want to become inhuman, right? This is not about getting rid of our emotions or becoming a robot, something like that. We want to perfect our humanity, perfect our human nature. And when we do this, we will become happy. So I love this quote from Cleanthes, which really kind of brings out this point. He says, "For all human beings have, from nature, inclinations toward virtue, and are like half lines of iambic verse, half lines of poetry. If they remain incomplete, they are base, or you might say foolish, unwise. But if they are completed or perfected, they are virtuous." So what Cleanthes is saying here is each one of us is like an unfinished poem. Right? Think about your favorite poem or maybe your favorite song, and someone's playing the song and they stop right before the conclusion, right before that last line. How do you feel? Your ear is longing to complete that, right? We're longing for that completion and fulfillment and harmonious resolution. So Cleanthes is saying this is what each one of us is like. We have these inclinations toward virtue from nature. This is just our genetic endowment, right? And we're all longing to fulfill this potential. Anything short of that leaves us hanging, right? We're longing to be complete. Now, to do this, in order to perfect or complete our humanity, we need to have a pretty good understanding of what it actually means to be human. There are a lot of different ways you could answer this question, right? But one way that the ancient Stoics answered it, and the one that we're going to be focusing on today, is to look at the nature of each creature, and in this case, humans. So if you want to look at what humans are, what human nature is, look at the specific characteristics that separate us from other creatures. So for example, just to take a simple example, think about a bumblebee. A bee, you're not going to say it's a good bee if it doesn't help the other bees in the hive, if it refuses to go from flower to flower gathering pollen, if it doesn't make honey, right? This is what bees do. This is what bees are meant to do. And so we wouldn't say that a bee is an excellent bee and it's not going to be fulfilling its nature or flourishing in its bee way, right? So that's a very simple example, obviously. But if you're looking at humans, you could say that the defining features of humanity, what sets us apart, what makes us who we are, what defines us, are some of these characteristics. So intelligence, obviously, this is a big one. We know now that we're not completely separate from animals. It's kind of more of a spectrum of intelligence. But it is such that we have an extreme, we're on the extreme end of the spectrum, right? So we love solving problems. We have this ability to imagine things that aren't there, counterfactual thinking. We can imagine what other people are thinking as well. So we have this very, very strong rational capacity and reasoning ability, and we need to use it well if we're going to be excellent and if we're going to flourish. Related to that is our desire for truth. This is something that doesn't get talked about that often, but it's actually extremely important when you think about it. Everybody likes to be right about things. We like to understand. We like to know things. Think about if you feel like you've been tricked, or if someone has pulled the wool over your eyes. We all hate that feeling, right? We have a natural yearning for truth and understanding. So much so that we even create puzzles and riddles for ourselves, right? Just so we have the pleasure of understanding, getting that aha moment. We love truth. Another feature, of course, a defining feature is our sociability, our extreme social gregariousness and social nature. So if you think about it, humans are meant to be in groups. We always live in families, in tribes, in communities. We perish when we're alone. And this is extremely evident when you think about children. Human infants are born completely helpless and have the longest childhood in the animal kingdom. And so they are very dependent on their caregivers. And in turn, human caregivers, parents, and other caregivers are created so that we can care about those children. Otherwise, we wouldn't be willing to put in all that work and get up in the middle of the night and pick up all those dirty socks off the floor, right? We are made so that we do care about our children. Otherwise, our species wouldn't be here at all. It's particularly interesting to me that contemporary evolutionary psychology suggests that our intelligence and our sociability kind of evolved in tandem, that we became so intelligent because we are so social, and it's kind of a virtuous cycle reinforcing each other. So these are really, really strong characteristics of humans. And what it means to be a good human is to exemplify excellence in these areas. Now that sounds like a lot, right? And of course, what we're talking about here is ideal human nature. The Stoics weren't going around and sampling people off the street and saying, okay, what do you think it means to be happy? No, they were looking at the ideal, because we know what average people are thinking, right? And the level of happiness that an average person has. And it's probably not going to be our ideal. So instead, we're looking at the highest level here so that we have something to aim for. And what's wonderful, whenever you're starting to think that this sounds really impossible to achieve, well, of course, it is an ideal, but it's something to aim for, right? And we can make progress. Of course, we will never become fully virtuous, but we can make progress in our way. And we have the starting points of virtue to point us in the right direction. So keep in mind, as we're going through the talk, that becoming happy, which is what we all want to do, means becoming virtuous, becoming an excellent person. And in order to do that, we need to care about others. We need to perfect our ability to care for others. So some of you might be thinking, what about the dichotomy of control? This has come up several times today, the dichotomy of control, which in its simplified version says that we shouldn't worry about things that are outside of our control. We should focus on what's within our control, our motivations, opinions, desires, aversions, and actions. And of course, this is true. This is a very good rule of thumb for a Stoic, but there is a risk of misunderstanding it when it's oversimplified. So I just want to point out that we are not supposed to stop caring about others because of the dichotomy of control. We're only supposed to stop letting our happiness depend on other people. This is a big distinction. Once you realize that your happiness is internal, it depends on your character and your fulfillment of your human nature, you understand that you are still caring about people, but your happiness doesn't depend on anything out there. It doesn't depend on what other people are doing, whether they give you the social approval that you might be craving, or whether they give you that promotion, or whether you get a certain number of likes on social media. None of that matters for your happiness. Your happiness depends on your internal character. And guess what? Your ability to care is part of your character. It's internal to you. You care about others no matter what other people are doing. You still have that ability and you still develop it. So what I would suggest as you're thinking about the dichotomy of control and caring for other people, that you kind of break it down into these two questions. So you might say, does my good, in other words, my happiness, what's good for me, does that depend on other people? And for a Stoic, the answer is always going to be no, it doesn't. Your happiness doesn't depend on what's going on out there. But there's another question we can ask. Is it appropriate for me to care about other people? And the answer to that is yes. It is appropriate because you are a human and it is part of your nature, and you find your flourishing and happiness that way. So I hope that's clear. I hope that clarifies a little bit about how, as a good Stoic, we do care and we still apply the dichotomy of control. And I really like this quote from Marcus Aurelius, which exemplifies this idea. He says, a human being finds delight in doing what is proper to a human being. And what is proper is to show goodwill to our own kind, right? So we derive our happiness just by doing what's proper to us, what's appropriate. And what is appropriate for us is to show goodwill to others. Okay, so once we know that we are supposed to care, then we need to think about how to do it wisely. So this completely changes our relationship to other people. We care about them, but we need to figure out how to do it wisely without letting our happiness depend on other people. In other words, we need to perfect our care for them. So this is what perfecting your care or your nature would be like. Now, of course, the ancient Stoics looked to the ideal of the sage. And as we all recognize, sages are probably don't really exist in our world. None of us are going to become sages anytime soon. But that's not the point. We still need a guide to work towards, right? We need an idea to guide us as we try to do this. So the sage, someone with perfected judgment, would also have perfected emotions. So remember, again, we're not talking about getting rid of all of our emotions. We do want to get rid of the passions, and that comes from developing good judgment about what's important in life and about what our happiness depends on. So some examples that the ancient Stoics gave of these perfected emotions are good intent, which would be wishing for good things for someone else's sake, goodwill, welcoming, cherishing. You get the idea, right? These very extremely positive but other-oriented emotions, caring about other people for their sake and continuously wishing them good things, cheerfulness and joy. This sounds pretty good, right? This is our goal. So how do we get there? Well, I'd like to illustrate this with an example from Epictetus, one of my favorite discourses, 222, where he's talking about our relationships with other people. And, you know, Epictetus is a teacher. He's in his classroom talking to the equivalent of university students. He also has audience members who are adults, just community members who stop by to listen to his lecture. So he starts the lecture with this really provocative statement. It is to the wise alone that the power to love belongs. Only the wise can love. Really provocative, right? So as you might expect, one of his students pipes up and says, wait a minute, I'm not wise, but I still love my family. I love my child. So this gives Epictetus the opportunity to explain that until you have perfected your judgment, you're not truly loving. And the reason is because, as a general rule, and one should have no illusions on the matter, there's nothing that a living creature is more strongly attached to than its own benefit. So if you are placing your benefit anywhere external to you, whether that's in pursuing riches or fame or power, whatever it is, or if you put your benefit in another person and they don't return your affection or something like that, anything that is external to you, of course, you're going to be unhappy because things change. You don't have control over what's out there. And you also might trample on that other person. If you truly believe that your good lies outside of you, then you're going to do whatever it takes to achieve that good. You think that's your good. And as a result, that's where all of your motivations lead you. So if you want to love truly, if you want to be happy and love truly and develop good judgment, then you need to realize that your benefit is internal, which is what we've been saying the whole time, right? It's in your character. And then you find your flourishing, your benefit, your happiness. So he says, if I am where my moral self is, in that case alone will I be the friend, the son, the father, the mother, the sister that I ought to be. For then it will benefit me to preserve my trustworthiness, my sense of shame, my patience, my temperance, my cooperativeness, and to maintain good relations with others. When you recognize that your good is internal, then you can truly love. You can give that altruistic love without expecting anything in return. You have the joy of giving that love that's independent over whether someone returns your affections or whether that person passes away or whatever the circumstances of your life are. If you are where your moral self is, then you can truly love. So the point I'd like to emphasize here is that we actually benefit ourselves when we love others. And as we learn to care wisely, we become happier. So again, everybody benefits here, right? We're benefiting ourselves. Of course, we're benefiting other people by giving them this goodwill and acting justly towards them as well. So this is wonderful all around. And what I really love is when Stoicism converges with wisdom from other traditions as well. And these days from science, we have some great scientific studies supporting this idea as well. So the quote I have for you here is from Matthieu Ricard, who is a Buddhist monk, a translator for the Dalai Lama. And he has been called the happiest man alive due to his participation in some research studies, some neuroscience studies that looked at his brain activity as he was meditating on compassion and altruistic love. So Ricard says, on the level of lived experience, and again, we're not talking just about theory here. This is practical lived experience. Altruistic love is accompanied by a profound feeling of fullness. Here we go again with this sense of fullness, of completion, of perfecting. And it is also the state of mind that activates the most brain areas linked to the positive emotions. Altruistic love is the most positive of all the positive emotions. And that's pretty amazing. And it just reinforces this idea that we've been talking about. We become happy when we fulfill our potential for love, for caring about other people. So I hope you have a strong motivation now to think about love and care from a Stoic perspective as well. Now, I know this is really hard to do. I know I need all the help I can get to do this. And I imagine that all of you do as well. So I just want to offer 3 ideas. Now, Stoicism is full of ideas and advice and techniques for doing this. I would especially recommend reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He talks a lot in there about specific techniques to care wisely, to care about other people. So here I'm just going to pull out 3 that I think are really helpful and might be good to get you started. So this one comes from Seneca. Think of every interaction with others as meaningful. Now, this is really hard to do today because we have so many interactions with people. You know, maybe you're commuting to work and you see hundreds of people, their faces pass in a blur, right? So we're bombarded with interacting with people and we risk kind of not seeing them as human anymore. We're just not thinking about it. So Seneca tells us, let this verse be in your heart and in your mouth. And this is a verse from another play. I am a human being. I regard nothing human as foreign to me. This is a very simple verse. You can carry it with you all day. Anytime you have an interaction with someone else, whether it's a stranger you're just checking out at the supermarket, or whether it's with your best friend or your spouse, a family member, I am a human being. I regard nothing human as foreign to me. That means that person that you just have that brief interaction with, guess what? They're a person too. They have their own understandings and feelings behind that face, right? Online, this is especially difficult to do online. We might not even see faces, right? We just have words. Well, okay, online, there are some bots and other things, but a lot of times it is a person that you're interacting with, right? So remind yourself, I am a human being. I regard nothing human as foreign to me. Seneca also tells us we are linked in companionship, in human companionship, to every other person. So treat them as such, respect them. Even if they've done something that's unkind, even if they've done something you disagree with, even if they have different political opinions that you disagree with, you still treat them respectfully. They are a person. Don't expect other people to make you happy. Now, of course, we've talked about this already quite a lot, but I would just like to emphasize this even applies when you're doing something nice for other people. You do something nice for other people. You do the right thing because it makes you happy to do so, not because you expect a reward from it, not because you expect recognition or appreciation, because guess what? A lot of times you're not going to get it. A lot of times people won't even realize you've done something nice for them. But Marcus Aurelius tells us, tell me, when you've done a good turn, what more do you want? Is it not enough that in doing this, you've acted according to your own nature, that you should go on to seek a reward for it? It's just as if the eye sought compensation for seeing, or the feet for walking. You do what you do, and it brings delight to you because it is an expression of your fullest humanity. And that's where you find your happiness. And remember what's important in life. We need to develop good judgment. Epictetus, in that same discourse, 222, says, whoever among you sincerely wants to be friend to another should eradicate bad judgments and despise them and banish them from your mind. So we've talked here just about one slice of Stoicism, ethics. It's also important to bring in your logic and your physics. In other words, your relationship with yourself, with your own inner discourse, and with the wider world. We don't have time to talk about all of that right now. They are important as well. So developing good judgment is part of a whole package, right? And we want to remind ourselves constantly, we want to always have these Stoic ideas on our lips and in our minds so that we can develop that good judgment at every moment. So these are just 3 ideas that I hope can get you started. There's a lot more out there. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time. If you'd like to learn more about kind of the theory of humanist Stoicism, you can check out my website, livinginagreement.com. I talk about moral psychology there. Stoicare.com is a new site that I have with Eve Riches, where we're really focusing on the practical aspects of caring as a Stoic. And we've designed it for basically anyone who cares, parents, teachers, mentors, medical professionals, therapists, everybody. And we're really excited. We've got some new resources coming online soon for that. And I'm always happy to answer questions. You can reach out to me on Twitter as well. So thank you so much for your attention today.
So we have about 6 minutes for questions. You can put them in the chat. While we're waiting, there was something that Austin Porter said that I think could be interesting to respond to. He said, "It seems to me that many people enjoy or admire deliberate cruelty." How do you deal with people like that? I mean, that's sort of at an extreme. It's not just that you're nice to them and they're brusque with you. There are people who are actively mean.
Yes, well, recognizing that is part of wisdom, right? So, I kind of wanted to emphasize the caring aspects of Stoicism because we don't talk about that very much. But it's important to remember you use your good judgment as well. And you would never want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to be abused or taken advantage of. Wisdom means, getting yourself out of those situations. First, you try to influence the situation and take action. Right. So I want to make sure I'm not suggesting to people that, I've just got to take whatever this person is doing. I'm just going to sit here and care about them. Right. No. That's not what I'm talking about. You definitely want to take action. And, this applies on a societal level as well. You do want to take action when you can, when possible. There are always going to be evil people out there. Unfortunately, that's a fact of life. So definitely, you take action to prevent as much of that as possible. Stoicism is a philosophy of action. However, we all know there are times when you can't prevent that. So those are the times when you've got to focus on your care. And you know what? Every person is still a person. So part of the hardest thing to do is to care about people who we kind of feel like don't deserve our care.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, but yes. Does that answer the question?
It does. And actually, there's another question that's particularly good, and I think also has to do with care for the self. This is from Julianne. How can Stoicism help with burnout from full-time caregiving?
Oh, good question. And I actually just posted a resource on Stoic Care this week, specifically for healthcare professionals, because this is a major issue for healthcare professionals, obviously with the pandemic more than ever. So you might want to check that out. It's under the toolkits on Stoic Care. But one thing I've been really interested in, I don't have very long to talk about this, is the separation of empathy and compassion, or you could say cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. So this is something Stoicism can really help you with. And the Stoics talk about, part of caring wisely is separating your actions from what's happening out there. A doctor might do their best and the patient still doesn't get better, right? So we want to make sure that we have this wisdom to accept those things without becoming emotionally attached to it and emotionally identifying with the other person's suffering. This is something that's taken me a long time to get my head wrapped around, but Stoicism can really help with it. I also do want to mention, self-compassion, especially for caregivers. We are so underappreciated all the time. We're stressed. We don't have support from society, for one thing. So have compassion for yourself. I think this was mentioned earlier as well. We're not perfect, and you need to forgive yourself. Don't hold yourself to a highest standard and say, oh, I failed today because I didn't reach this. Well, of course, nobody's perfect, right? So having that self-compassion as well is compatible with Stoicism. You just try again the next day.
Yeah. Is there a point where you can say this is good enough? It's good. It's not perfect, but I've fulfilled my duties, or I've measured up to what needed to be done?
I think you have to do that, especially in the context of parenting, for example. No parent is ever
Yeah.
no parent is ever perfect, and many of us feel like we're not good enough. Oh, I snapped at my child today because I didn't get enough sleep last night, and she was pitching a temper tantrum. And and again, that's part of also being pushed to the limit and not having as much support. But yes, I think we have to do it every day and say, today I did my best. And then you wake up the next day and say, okay, today I'm going to do my best.
So your best is something not perfectionistic, right? But something dynamic, something possible. Oh, here's a good question to end on. Phil Glover, do you think compassion is more important than empathy? Oftentimes people make a distinction between the two. The distinctions are kind of loose and messy, but.
Yeah. Well, I would define empathy as kind of co-feeling with somebody, and that's something a Stoic would definitely want to avoid. You don't want to have a feeling for someone that causes you so much distress that you can't even help that person, right? So Stoicism helps us to avoid that feeling. You know, if pity is defined as a sympathetic sorrow, it's still a sorrow, it's still a passion, and Epictetus defines it as a passion. So yes, we want to avoid that while bringing in this, I call it cognitive empathy, kind of like we were talking about with the altruistic love. So it is different. It's on a different level, and it enables you to do what you need to do to care for that person.
All right. Well, this is an excellent talk. A lot of people saying so in the chat. Thanks so much to Brittany for offering this to all of us. We're moving on.